You know, for centuries, one number has pretty much been the undisputed symbol of, well, evil. The devil, the end of the world, you name it. It's so famous it barely needs an introduction. But what if the number we all know and fear is actually based on a 2,000-year-old misunderstanding?
Okay, so let's just get right into it. 666. We've all seen it. It's plastered everywhere in pop culture, right? From horror movies to heavy metal albums, it's the go-to shorthand for the Antichrist. And it all comes from the book of Revelation, which basically says, hey, if you're smart, calculate the number of the beast, because it's a human number, and that number is 666. Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it?
Well, hold on, because this is where things get really interesting. Some of the absolute oldest fragments of the book of Revelation we've ever found, they don't say 666, they say 616. And you can imagine, this discovery kicked off a huge debate. Could the most infamous evil number in all of history actually be a mistake?
So that leads a lot of people to ask what seems like a totally logical question. How and when did the original number, 616, get switched to the one we all know, 666? It sounds like the setup for a great historical detective story. Except, there's just one problem. That question? It's built on a completely false assumption. The evidence we have doesn't show 616 changing to 666. Nope. The real story is way more complicated and honestly a whole lot more clever than just a simple typo. Just look at this timeline, because it completely flips the script on what we thought we knew. Our earliest evidence about this number doesn't even come from a biblical manuscript. It comes from a writer, an early church father named Irenaeus, way back in the late 2nd century. And he was adamant that 666 was the right number, and he even called the 616 version a known error. Then, our oldest manuscript of this passage, P47, clearly has 666. The manuscript that got everyone talking about 616, that's P115, and it's actually from a century later.
And Irenaeus really didn't pull any punches. He wrote this around 185 AD, and he's basically calling out the 616 number as a copyist's goof that he was already aware of. And what's so crucial here is that Irenaeus was the student of a guy named Polycarp, who was a direct disciple of the Apostle John himself, the man who actually wrote Revelation. So Irenaeus was about as close to the source as you could possibly get.
Okay, so this brings us to the real question. If 666 is the older number, the one with the better historical backing, then why did 616 even exist at all? And why did it show up so early? Well, the answer isn't a mistake. It's a code. And to understand it, we need to dive into an ancient practice.
It's called Gematria. See, in ancient languages like Hebrew and Greek, letters also doubled as numbers. So alpha was 1, beta was 2, and you get the idea. This meant you could take any name or any word, add up the value of its letters, and get a single number. It was kind of like a numerological code, a really clever way to hide a secret meaning right there in the text.
So here's the basic idea of how you'd crack this code. First, you'd take a name, say the name of a Roman emperor. Then you'd translate the letters of that name into the Hebrew alphabet. And finally, you just add up the numerical values of those Hebrew letters, and voila, you get your number. I mean, the book of Revelation literally tells the reader to calculate the number of the beast. It was basically a puzzle just waiting for someone to solve it.
And for most scholars who've looked at this, the number one candidate for who this number points to is one of history's most famous villains, Emperor Nero. I mean, this guy was the first Roman emperor to really go after Christians in a big way. For a lot of early believers, he was the absolute embodiment of evil, a perfect fit for the beast.
And right here, this is where it all clicks into place and solves our whole mystery. You see, the Roman Empire had two main languages. Greek was spoken in the East and Latin in the West. Now get this. If you take the Greek spelling of Nero's name and title, Neron Caesar, and you run the Gematria calculation in Hebrew, you get exactly 666. But if you take the common Latin spelling, Nero Caesar, and do the exact same calculation, you get 616. So you see what's happening? This is the crucial point. 616 was never a mistake. It was almost certainly an intentional variant. It was a genius way for the author to create a single coded message that would work for both Greek-speaking and Latin-speaking audiences all across the Roman Empire. No matter which spelling of the emperor's name you were familiar with, the math still pointed to the same guy.
Okay, but solving the code just leads to another, maybe even bigger question. Why all the secrecy? Why not just come out and say Nero? Why write the whole book in these crazy visions and symbols and number codes? To get that, we have to understand what kind of book Revelation actually is. The Book of Revelation belongs to a special genre called apocalyptic literature. This was a style of writing that got really popular among Jewish and Christian communities whenever they were under intense persecution. It was never, ever meant to be read as some kind of literal step-by-step roadmap of the future. It was a way to speak truth to power in a coded language that insiders would get, offering hope to the suffering and saying, hey, even though it looks bad, God is still in control.
Yeah, this kind of writing has some really specific calling cards. A huge cosmic battle between good and evil, tons of symbols like animals and colors, and especially symbolic numbers. The whole point was for it to be understood by the community it was written for, while staying kind of confusing to outsiders. Like, for instance, Roman officials who probably wouldn't be too happy about being called the Beast.
And inside this symbolic world, numbers carried deep, deep meaning that went way beyond just gematria. For instance, the number 7. That was the number of divine perfection, of completeness. It was basically God's number. And in contrast, you had the number 6. 6 represented humanity, imperfection, always falling just short of that divine ideal. It was the number of man.
So when you see 666, it's doing double duty. It's not just a clever code pointing to Nero. It's also making a powerful theological statement. It is the number of man, 6, repeated 3 times for maximum emphasis. It represents the ultimate, arrogant, God-defying expression of humanity. It's the peak of human evil, trying and failing to be like God.
You know, it's funny. Even that guy Irenaeus, the one who defended 666 so fiercely, he also warned people against getting too obsessed with trying to decode names. He tossed out a few ideas for who it might be in his day, but in the end, he basically said the safest bet was to focus on the prophecy's bigger message of faith and endurance instead of getting lost in speculation. So at the end of the day, this whole fascinating debate between 666 and 616, it pulls back the curtain on the real point of the Book of Revelation. It wasn't about scaring people thousands of years in the future with a spooky number. It was about sending a coded message of hope and encouragement to real people who were suffering in the first century, assuring them that even the most powerful, beastly empires on earth would not have the last word.
And it really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The number of the beast wasn't some ancient typo. It was a masterfully designed code. It really makes you wonder, what other powerful secrets from history aren't actually lost, but are just hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to finally learn the language they were written in?